There are moments in a country's history when a natural disaster becomes more than just a headline, when it becomes a defining event that reshapes communities, exposes vulnerabilities, and brings out both the fragility and the resilience of an entire population. Right now, southern Thailand is living through one of those moments. What began as an unusually strong monsoon quickly escalated into a region-wide emergency, catching thousands of families unprepared and forcing authorities into a desperate race against time. Songkhla, Thailand, in November 2024. Over the last days, the rains have refused to stop, the rivers have refused to retreat, and the floodwaters have continued to rise with an almost unstoppable momentum. In many ways, the disaster didn't strike all at once. Instead, it unfolded like a creeping shadow, expanding hour by hour as weather systems gathered strength offshore. Meteorologists had warned of a low-pressure zone building in the Gulf of Thailand, but few expected it to stall over the region, pulling in moisture day and night like an enormous pump. The sky remained thick and gray for days, until finally the clouds burst open and released torrents of rain that pounded rooftops, fields, and roadways without pause. By the time residents realized the severity of the situation, water was already collecting in streets, drains were overflowing, and the ground was too saturated to absorb even a single drop more. In the province of Songkhla, the city of Hat Yai once again found itself at the heart of the crisis. Long known as a commercial hub connecting Malaysia and Thailand, Hat Yai has always been vulnerable to flooding due to its position in a natural basin surrounded by hills. But this time, the scale of the rainfall was unlike anything seen in years. Within a single day, the city recorded more than 300 millimeters of rain, pushing the urban drainage system far past its limits. Cars began floating like abandoned boats, storefronts filled with murky water, and residents struggled to wade through rising currents that carried debris, branches, and even pieces of broken infrastructure. The stories coming from inside the city are a haunting reminder of how quickly life can shift from normalcy to survival. Families who had gone to sleep expecting just another night of rain awoke to the sound of rushing water pouring under their doors. Children were rushed upstairs, pets were carried into attics. Elderly parents were gently escorted to higher ground, sometimes by neighbors using makeshift rafts made from plastic tubs and metal barrels. People moved quickly, grabbing only the essentials: clothes, documents, medicine, and perhaps a single family photo that could not be replaced. But while Hat Yai became one of the most visible symbols of the flooding, it was far from the only place suffering. Pattani, Yala, and Narathiwat, three provinces already accustomed to seasonal storms, were hit even harder in terms of the sheer volume and persistence of the rainfall. In these provinces, the problem wasn't just water accumulating from the sky. It was water rushing down mountainsides, carving channels through forests, destroying small bridges, and swallowing rural villages whole. Narrow riverbanks overflowed with alarming speed, turning peaceful streams into violent torrents that uprooted trees and tore through farmland. For local farmers, the devastation has been heartbreaking. Rubber plantations, the lifeblood of many southern Thai communities, now stand partially submerged, with rows of trees sticking out of muddy floodwaters like silent witnesses to nature's fury. Rice fields, which should have been nearing harvest, have been completely washed away in some areas, erasing months of hard work in a matter of hours. Cattle have been stranded on small patches of elevated ground, while poultry farms have faced massive losses as chickens drowned in coops overwhelmed by the rising water. Even the coastal regions were not spared. Along the shores of the Gulf of Thailand, waves grew increasingly aggressive as wind speeds intensified. Fishing boats, some belonging to families who rely on the sea for survival, were forced to remain anchored as ocean conditions became far too dangerous to navigate. Ferry services connecting coastal towns and islands were suspended, leaving some travelers stranded and communities cut off from vital supplies. At times, the waves reached up to 3 meters, slamming into seawalls and further intensifying the flooding near coastal homes. Throughout the region, rescue teams have been operating around the clock. Soldiers, emergency responders, and volunteers navigate flooded streets using inflatable boats to reach people trapped on upper floors or rooftops. But the conditions make everything more complicated. Downed power lines pose electrocution risks. Trees blocking roads force rescuers to take detours through deeper waters. Communication towers in some districts have been damaged, leaving families unable to call for help and forcing emergency crews to physically check neighborhood by neighborhood. Shelters across the region are filling at a rapid pace. Schools, temples, and community halls have been converted into temporary evacuation centers, offering mats, blankets, food, and first aid supplies to displaced residents. Volunteers organize donation drives to collect dry clothes, baby formula, bottled water, and hygiene kits. And while the sense of community remains powerful, anxiety is growing as meteorological agencies warn that more rain may be on the way. Perhaps the most worrying aspect of this disaster is that the flooding has not yet stabilized. Rivers continue to swell. Dams are reaching critical levels. If rainfall continues at even moderate levels, additional flash floods or landslides could occur without warning. Landslides are already being reported on steep mountain roads, where soil weakened by days of water has begun slipping away in thick, heavy layers. Motorists are urged to avoid mountain routes, yet some have no choice but to travel them in order to reach relatives or escape rising waters. Health concerns are also growing. Stagnant water is a breeding ground for mosquitoes, increasing fears of dengue fever. Contaminated floodwater can spread skin infections and gastrointestinal illnesses. With medical facilities overwhelmed and some clinics partially flooded, volunteers are distributing disinfectants and clean water in an effort to prevent another wave of suffering layered on top of the current crisis. Economically, the impact will be enormous. Southern Thailand plays a crucial role in agriculture, fishing, tourism, and cross-border trade. The closure of major roads and the flooding of commercial areas have halted countless businesses, from small market stalls to large retail centers. Tourism, often a major source of income in the region, has effectively paused as flights are disrupted, transportation routes are submerged, and travelers cancel or postpone their trips. Yet despite the devastation, something powerful is emerging: solidarity. Communities are working together in ways that go beyond daily life, neighbors carrying neighbors, strangers offering shelter, and young volunteers braving waist-deep water to deliver meals to isolated households. Temples and mosques are distributing food daily, proving once again that in moments of crisis, the cultural and spiritual heart of southern Thailand plays a vital role in keeping people strong. Still, the emotional toll on residents is undeniable. Many have lost homes they spent decades building. Others have seen their businesses swept away. Parents worrying not just about immediate safety but about what the future holds, whether their livelihoods can survive, how long recovery will take, and whether the floods will return again next year or even sooner. Because for many families, this disaster is not their first. Southern Thailand has faced severe floods before, and each event leaves behind scars that never fully heal. Authorities are now assessing long-term solutions, from improved drainage systems to reinforced riverbanks and expanded floodplain zones. But these solutions take time, years in some cases, and the people affected today are dealing with urgent, immediate needs. Food, shelter, medicine, clean drinking water, and transportation remain the top priorities. Farther inland, rescue helicopters survey rural areas, mapping the spread of floodwaters and identifying communities still awaiting evacuation. Some villages are completely isolated, roads washed away, bridges collapsed, and boats unable to pass through debris-clogged rivers. For these residents, help arrives mainly through airdrops of supplies, a temporary but essential lifeline. Though uncertainty looms, one thing is clear: the impact of this disaster will extend far beyond the end of the storm. Even once the rain stops and the waters begin to recede, the region will face months of cleanup, rebuilding, and recovery. Mud will need to be cleared, infrastructure repaired, farmlands restored, and families resettled. The emotional recovery may take even longer as people process the trauma of losing homes, livelihoods, and a sense of stability. Still, hope persists. The resilience of southern Thailand has always been its defining strength. Through every disaster, every monsoon, every storm, every challenge, its people rise again, rebuild again, and support one another through the darkest hours. And as long as the rain keeps falling, so too will the determination of the communities standing together against the floodwaters. As the days progressed, the situation in southern Thailand entered a new and more complex phase. The rain had not stopped completely, but it had slowed enough for the floodwaters to reveal the full extent of the damage beneath the muddy surface. In many neighborhoods, the water was still waist-deep, but in others it began to drain slowly, leaving behind layers of thick silt that coated every street, every doorstep, and every piece of furniture that had been submerged. People could finally step outside to assess what had survived and what had not. For many, the reality was difficult to face. In Hat Yai, residents began navigating the streets not with boats but with boots, masks, and gloves as they examined their homes. Floors were warped, appliances ruined, and walls carried watermarks nearly as high as a person's shoulders. For shop owners in the commercial district, the losses were staggering. Merchandise that had been stocked for the upcoming holiday season now lay soaked and unsellable. Electrical systems in many buildings had short-circuited. Some businesses had invested in flood barriers, but the sheer quantity of water had overwhelmed even the best preparations. For small family-run shops, reopening would require more than cleanup. It would require financial help, something many were unsure they could obtain in time. In Patani, the situation was just as critical but took on a different shape. Many rural villages remained surrounded by floodwaters even as rainfall decreased. The flat agricultural landscapes offered little natural drainage, causing water to stagnate across fields and farmlands. Farmers waded through thigh-deep water to check on crops that were already beyond saving. Fruit orchards, especially those growing longan and rambutan, had suffered extensive root damage. In some areas, the soil was so saturated that entire trees had collapsed sideways, their roots lifting out of the ground like giant claws. The economic impact would not be limited to this month or this season. It could affect the next harvest cycle and possibly the following year. Families living near rivers faced an additional risk. Even as rainfall slowed, the rivers remained dangerously high. The accumulated water from upstream provinces continued